Before starting this video, I do want to give a thank you to my patrons that support the channel. And if you would like to support the channel, there are some great benefits for you in the link down below. So with that, let's get into today's video. What's going on YouTube? This is Devin coming back at you with another video today on Pub Stomp MTG. Today we're continuing Wild of Eldraine and we're going to be talking about Brenard Ginger Sculptor. First of all, I have to comment on the name. Brenard is absolutely perfect. I love that name, especially for this character. He just looks so happy making gingerbread men left and right. I feel like this is going to be a very popular commander just based off the art alone. So for a colorless green, white, and a blue, he's a 3/3 legendary creature human artificer. He has the abilities of each creature you control that's a food or a golem, has +2/+2 and trample. So a great anthem effect for those creature types specifically. What else does he do? Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you may exile it. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a 1/1 food golem artifact creature in addition to its other types, and it has pay 2 colorless mana, tap it, sacrifice this artifact, you gain 3 life. So based off appearances, he looks like a jolly old guy just making gingerbread men left and right. However, he's making his friends into gingerbread men. Remember that, because people are dying left and right, and what is he doing with that? If you haven't watched the movie Sweeney Todd, this kind of feels like Mrs. Lovett taking those bodies and making them into pies, but instead of this, they're making them into gingerbread men. I don't want to think about it anymore. Let's focus on what we want to do with Brenard. So first of all, he does focus on food and also golem, so we're going to have a little bit of a golem synergy in this deck because he is producing golem tokens that are foods as well. So I first thought of Malcator, Priority Overseer. So for 3 mana, when it enters the battlefield, you create a 3/3 colorless Phyrexian Golem artifact creature token, and at the beginning of your end step, if 3 or more artifacts enter the battlefield under your control this turn, create a 3/3 colorless Phyrexian Golem creature token. So this surprisingly has great synergy with our commander. We're going to have a lot of creatures dying and reappearing as golems on the battlefield as artifacts, and the more artifacts that we put on the battlefield, the more golems Malcator is going to be putting on the battlefield. And remind you, the commander is going to give them +2/+2 and trample. So I feel like this has some pretty good synergy with our commander. Another card that's very synergistic is, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name, Salvage Splicers. So for 5 mana, it enters the battlefield. You're going to be making a 3/3 golem on the battlefield, and whenever an artifact is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you can put a 1/1 counter on this and also a golem you control. So we can sacrifice foods to buff up some of our creatures, so this is a good use of that. Also on top of that, I did want to mention Darksteel Splicer, mainly because golems you control have indestructible, so all the golems we do have on the battlefield, no matter what, are going to be indestructible, and plus with our commander on the battlefield, they're going to be +2/+2 and trample. So I feel like this is a great fit overall. With Bernard's ability, we're going to be making tokens out of creatures that died on our battlefield, so a way we could double up that is by having different cards like Mondrak, Glory Dominus, Anointed Procession, Parallel Lives, and Adrix and Nev, Twin Casters. These all will provide that synergy so that when we put a token on the battlefield, we'll make an extra token on top of that. With our commander, we are creating a token, and with the ruling, these will be creating additional copy off of those tokens. So the more tokens you will produce, the more you're going to double those with these cards. On top of that, the more creatures on the battlefield we do have that are tokens, the more we could abuse Curiosity Crafter. For 4 mana, it does have flying and you have no maximum hand size. It does have that amazing ability, whenever a creature token you control deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. So if we have like 5 tokens on the battlefield, we could swing in, and mind you, our commander is going to be a great anthem for our token of golems, having +2/+2 and trample, so they're probably going to go in for damage, and we could potentially draw 5 cards. That's based off of the 5 tokens example, but if you have a lot more tokens on the battlefield, the more card draw you're going to get out of Curiosity Crafter. On top of that, I did want to mention the Lord of the Rings set because it had an amazing synergy with food. So for example, a couple of cards I did want to mention is Banquet Guest, having affinity for food, and on top of that, when it enters the battlefield, you put X 1/1 counters on it based off how much you'd paid into X. And on top of that, if you do sacrifice a food for 2 mana, it gains indestructible until end of turn. Plus, it does have trample, so this could be a very huge creature on the board. board. Speaking of huge creatures, Feasting Hobbit is one of my favorite cards that came out. It has Devour Food 3, and on top of that, creatures with power less than Feasting Hobbit's power can't block it. So if you just sacrifice, let's just say 3 foods, your Feasting Hobbit will become an 11/11, basically unblockable just for 2 mana. That's quite insane. Another insane card in the deck is Eleanor Gardener. I'm pretty high on this card. It enters the battlefield with a food token, and at the beginning of your end step, if you sacrifice the food this turn, you may search your library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield tapped. So I will say this is pretty useful in the deck so that we can ramp ahead if we need to, especially if we want to sacrifice some of our food golems that we created with our commander. On top of that, if we're creating food golems, we might as well have Peregrine Took on the battlefield. If 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, those tokens plus an additional food token are created instead, and it also does have the ability of sacrificing 3 foods, draw a card. So this is just great versatility overall if you want to draw some extra cards by sacrificing some of your golems. I did also want to share the Shire's greatest couple with Rosie Cotton of South Lane and also Samwise Gamgee. Rosie Cotton, whenever you create a token, you put a 1/1 counter on a target creature you control other than Rosie, so you can buff up all your golems on the battlefield. Plus, they will have trample with your commander and +2/+2, so Rosie Cotton is pretty great. Samwise Gamgee is another great card in the deck. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you create a food token, and if you want to sacrifice 3 food tokens, you could return a target historic card from your graveyard to your hand. So again, we are creating a lot of food tokens on the battlefield that are golems as well with our commander and some of our token doublers. Samwise will also get us to return some cards to our hand, so this is an excellent choice. I did also want to talk about food synergy, mainly because, of course, this is more of a food deck. I did want to mention Ginger Brute and Sir Ginger the Meal Ender. I did make a deck tech on Sir Ginger the Meal Ender pretty recently. If you do want to go check that out, the link will be posted. I did mainly want to add these for flavor reasons. Sir Ginger is the better of the bunch, mainly whenever another artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you'll put a 1/1 counter on her and scry 1. This is very useful overall. Another use include is the Goose Mother. I'm not going to dive too much into this card. I did make a video about this one specifically in a commander deck tech, so if you do want to go check that out, I'll post the link above here as well. But I specifically like this card mainly because of the card draw effect. Whenever it does attack, you may sacrifice a food. If you do, you draw a card. So if you do have some extra food lying around, and most likely if you did pay into X with her, you're going to have a lot of foods on the battlefield so that you could sacrifice them to draw some cards. On top of that, I did want to mention everybody's favorite Oko, Thief of Crowns. Everybody loves him. He was a terror to standard. So it may not seem obvious, but this is a very busted card. Not as busted in Commander compared to other formats. But for him right here, he's pretty incredible to make a food token. And on top of that, he's good removal, making things left and right into Elks. So what more can I say about Oko? He's pretty incredible. He's super busted, especially in other formats like I previously mentioned. Just a great card to include. Of course, if you do have a lot of food tokens on the battlefield and they're not creatures, you could use cards like Masterful Replication, Cyberdrive Awakener, and Rise and Shine to make them all creatures on the battlefield. Say for example, in a game of Commander, you were stockpiling food like no other, like you're preparing for the apocalypse. You can essentially make those food into creatures, and on top of that with your commander, they will get +2/+2 and trample. I do specifically like Cyberdrive Awakener because other artifact creatures you control have flying, so not just your food tokens that just became creatures, also some of your food tokens that you did make with your commander will have flying on top of that, so great evasion overall with Cyberdrive Awakener. However, that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on Bernard. I seriously love the name Bernard, but Bernard Ginger Sculptor. I feel like this is going to be a pretty popular commander out of the set. It is out of the commander, like you would find it in the set packs, I believe. I'm not 100% sure how you'd find this card specifically. Nonetheless, this is going to be a pretty popular commander in my opinion because a lot of people wanting to build around those Ginger Brood style cards. So for me, I could see this being a very casual commander. It's just about beating face and making tokens out of cards that died. Again, I am bringing up the Sweeney Todd reference, but seriously, you have comrades on the battlefield and the first thing you want to do is make them into gingerbread? Come on, Bernard, seriously? Aside from that reference, what do you think of Bernard Ginger Sculptor? I do feel like this is again going to be a pretty popular commander. I love the idea of making food tokens on the battlefield and giving them a +2/+2 and trample. I do like the idea that this is also a little bit of a Golem tribal theme as well, but clearly in this video I went more for a food theme because obviously these are gingerbread men that he is making. However, I would love to hear from you. How would you build around Brenard Ginger Sculptor? Would you go more for a food theme or a Golem theme or a little bit of both? I'd love to hear your comments. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And with that out of the way, thank you for stomping by.